Good afternoon. My name is Joyce Sayers, and I'm the current chair of the Memorial University Alumni Board within the GTA. I graduated in 1983 from MUN and have been involved with various volunteer roles for the alumni for over 20 years. My involvement has allowed me the opportunity to connect with fellow graduates, to develop friendships, and has been a significant contribution in my career and my personal growth. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We welcome you to join our local chapter and look forward to meeting you at many more events to come. We will begin today's event with a land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. The GTA Alumni Board has recently been redesigned. Our new mandate is focused on offering you many ways to connect with each other and with Memorial. We are working diligently to create opportunities to celebrate, socialize, mentor, learn, and advance both your career and improve your life. I encourage you to stay tuned for what is next. Memorial has so many exciting things happening. If you haven't been following the president on Twitter, check out Dr. Vianne Timmons at Vianne_Timmons. You'll be inspired. She's recently announced a new strategy, new master's program. She's opened up the core science building and more. Great things are happening at our alma mater. I would now like to introduce you to a fellow alumni board member, Swansea Korshi. Swansea is a proud Bachelor of Commerce grad with 20 years of investment industry experience. He currently works at Scotiabank Global Banking and Markets as a director for the energy sales specialist in the Global Equity Group. Prior to joining Scotiabank, Swansea worked as a portfolio manager on oil and gas mandates at a leading Canadian independent investment firm, where she gained over 10 years of oil and gas research and analysis and portfolio management.
Thank you, Joy, for that introduction, and thank you all very much for joining us today for our discussion on how both job seekers and organizations in the GTA are adapting to a new hybrid world, including trends, expectations, and new realities. This is the first of what we hope will be many opportunities for us to connect and engage with Memorial alumni friends in the GTA and in a meaningful way. I'm hoping that we will find new ways to connect online and in person as we move forward. Just a few housekeeping items before we start today's presentation. There will be a brief Q&A that follows the presentation. Please use the Q&A function, which you'll find in the bottom right of your screen, to submit your questions. I encourage you to keep your questions short and also get them in as soon as possible. We do have a pretty full program today, so we won't have too much time for Q&A at the end. So please get your questions in as soon as possible. You will not be able to unmute your microphone or turn on your video while we are in this session, and you won't be able to see each other's messages. There is a closed caption function available in the platform, and you can turn it on by pressing the CC button on the left of your screen. We are streaming live today, but this session is also being recorded, and you'll receive a link for it in an event email that will follow. Now, it is with great pleasure that I officially introduce our guest speakers for today. Andrew Kelly is an accomplished sales leader with over 25 years of experience leading high-performance sales teams in growth industries, including cloud and analytics. Andrew has launched the Canadian operations of several high-growth tech startups, including Sisense, the market leader in embedded analytics, where he's currently the North American Regional Vice President. Andrew is an avid cyclist. He's a diehard sports fan and a hobby golfer, and he currently lives in Toronto with his wife, Sue Ann, and their daughter, Leah. David Kin is the Senior Managing Director with Robert Half, the world's first and largest specialized talent solutions firm that connects opportunities at great companies with highly skilled job seekers. For more than 25 years, David has led a successful career with Robert Half, holding senior management positions in Eastern and Western Canada. In his current role, he oversees both the Canadian and South American Robert Half businesses. David's perspectives and knowledge on workplace issues and labor trends are often featured in media outlets and executive keynotes. He also provides curriculum guidance to leading educational institutions across the country, including our very own Memorial University. Under his direction, Robert Half has established itself as a leading advisor to businesses internationally, helping companies in all stages of growth establish talented teams and thriving organizations. I will now turn the floor over to Andrew and David, and I'll see you all in the Q&A.
Thank you, Swansea. Dave, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know we've talked a little bit over the last 2 years and what we've lived through, but we're starting to see that recovery. And I think recently the Canadian labor market is recovering, and we're seeing from Stats Can, more jobs being created. Certainly, I'm seeing that from a lot of companies as I talk to even companies in the US opening offices in Canada. But I'd really like to hear from your perspective, what you can describe you're seeing in your business, and specifically kind of around talent solutions, looking at kind of both permanent and contract kind of roles.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Andrew. And certainly a huge welcome to everybody who's been able to join us today. I appreciate the comments, Joy and Swansea, and it's great to assemble a bunch of our alumni as well as friends of Robert Half for our discussion. I do look forward to our discussion, Andrew, and hopefully in the near future we can do something like this in person. Just to leverage even further, I think what was given as an introductory to our company, to give some perspective on our involvement with the labor market. We have a footprint right across Canada in the professional spaces, primarily finance and IT, legal operations, as well as an executive search practice. We do both full-time and contract transactions with our clients. But to give you a perspective on volume, we do over 1,000 professional hires a month for clients in Canada. So we have a pulse on what's happening by way of both our client feedback and the feedback from those professionals we place. And that's a lot of what will drive the commentary today, as well as formal research that we conduct in the marketplace on the themes that we will obviously discuss over the next 40 minutes or so. So really what's happening in today's market? Well, about 28% of the professional workers that we are involved with would indicate that they're actually going to look for a new job in the first 6 months of this year. 28%. And that's up from 21% just 6 months ago, which would indicate that we're obviously seeing increased confidence in the market in those professional spaces. Now, at the same time, we have about 50% of managers that are saying that they're going to add net new full-time headcount in the next 6 months. And also will be adding to replace the roles that they may have had to reduce during the pandemic. All of this would indicate that we are going to see some fairly heavy transaction in the labor market in the next 6 months. And that is both on the full-time and contract side. So we also see more than 50% of hiring authorities indicating that they will also add contract professionals, because they want to make sure that they can tap into specialized skills that they may need to execute strategy. They also want to make sure they're not overburdening their current employee group from a workload perspective, and therefore prevent any burnout that may happen with regard to their employee group. So it's a very sensitive time. I think workers are mindful that they feel they probably have an opportune market at the moment in their favor. I think in the last couple of days, we've also all heard about the inflationary pressure, and therefore that's also impacting some inflationary pressure on wages. We are seeing really almost day to day having to determine what the spot price of somebody's compensation should really be. And so counter offers are very common. Counter offers that seem arguably irrational in the moment, but they're real. We just had an example in the last day or two of somebody who was making 75,000. We were able to secure them a great new opportunity at 92,000, and they were countered at 105,000 by their current company. That's a 40% increase in base, staying with the same company. So, there's arguments to be made for pro and con of whether that's a good decision to stay, because there's obviously things that have led up to that decision. But that's the kind of fluidity we're seeing in the labor market, and we don't see it really slowing anytime soon.
That's very interesting. It certainly supports kind of this theme of the great resignation that we're hearing in the market. I've seen it on both sides of the border, and certainly feeling it even within my staff of people always looking for opportunity. It's certainly very interesting to see people kind of making that decision now in the next 6 months after being kind of the last 2 years living through it. But it's certainly made it very difficult for people to find talent and, like you said, retain it, right? So what are you seeing and hearing from employers that are hiring, and what are they doing to kind of attract top talent?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to be proactive and avoid losing top talent. And so I would suggest that when it comes to that idea of being proactive, pretty well every employer out there today should assume that your top and most loyal individuals on your team are in fact considering other options. And even if they're not proactively considering it, they're hearing from people like our firm to talk about those opportunities that may be in the market. And so you need to be mindful that the labor force is pretty fluid at the moment, and even your best people that you think would never leave you are considering that option, at least in discussion, even if they're not doing anything about it. And so I think it's important that we are very mindful. The last couple of years have been difficult for people, and people are obviously reflecting on different things that may have occurred that they want to ensure now they're doing the right thing, both personally and professionally. And really, are they in the right role? Are they in the right company? So assume your top people are at least going through this reflection at this period of time. And therefore, what you want to do is make sure you prevent an onset of heavy turnover in your company. Once that turnover starts, it's already a little late. You probably have already had some damage done. And so what can you do to ensure you prevent this? I think you want to be very mindful, as we mentioned, about compensation. If you have not reviewed compensation in your organization, it is important you do so, because it has changed materially in the last year, and it's changing really every day. I think it's also important that you connect in a meaningful way with each of your employees. And so through your leadership team, making sure that your employees understand their contribution to the company, making sure they understand that their jobs are very meaningful, very important to the overall organization, and making sure that they are getting the recognition they deserve, which doesn't always have to be a trip abroad. It can just be a simple thank you, but recognition is very, very critical. And I think it's also very evident that you as an organization now, if possible, need to be flexible and offer options for employers to make sure they engage in a way with their work that works for them. To obviously offer a significant amount of trust that they will do their job, whether they're sitting in the office or not. And making sure that at the same time, you're investing in their professional development. 2 years ago, when the pandemic first hit, we were really worried about just personal health and safety. Now I think people are starting to get more back in focus on some of the other things important to them, like career, and professional development is important. I think one of the best ways to ensure you can capture all of this per employee is to conduct what we suggest is a stay interview. So similar to when you're entertaining somebody for your company who's brand new, have an interview with somebody who's already with the organization and go through the same sort of questions. How are they seeing the organization? What's important to them? Are they happy? What do they see for themselves in the future? So some of the same questions you have for a brand new employee, do it with your existing staff, and make sure that during that process, you share your vision, both of the organization and also for them personally. What can they expect from a career perspective, from a compensation perspective, from an opportunity perspective? I think it's important also that we acknowledge what's happening today in many cases is that employers and employees maybe aren't communicating like this. And unfortunately, no news isn't always good news. If you're not having a healthy communication with your employee group right now, you may very well have a challenge in the near future by way of turnover and then having to face the challenge of attracting in this market. I think the same discussion we just had about how you retain is how you attract. Make sure you have great compensation. Make sure you have great flexibility when available and offer choice and trust to your employees as to how they engage with their workplace. Make sure you create a vision for them as to what their opportunity can be in the organization and what their professional journey could look like with your company. What we're seeing a lot today, which is a bit of a new phenomena, is a little bit of ghosting, if you will, of if you're trying to hire somebody, they just simply disappear on you. Because as an organization, you've taken too long to give them what they need to make a decision, and they've simply moved on to something else. And so it is really an employer's market today. I don't love the term war on talent. I think it just has sometimes negative connotations, but we all understand the context of what that means. Somebody said to me just recently that the war may be even over for now and the employees have won at the moment. And certainly that's what we're seeing. It's in their favor. They are in the driver's seat at this point in time.
It's a really interesting term, war on talent. So certainly I think what we're seeing specifically as an organization is trying to get employees back to the office for a bunch of reasons. And, with the return to the office for a lot of companies being very top of mind, what are you hearing? Do they want their teams back in the office? Are they being flexible? When it comes to remote work, what's the biggest trend you're seeing? What, from your perspective, when you talk to these companies and employees, what is it you're hearing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's become probably the hottest topic as we speak to professionals who are looking for a new opportunity. It's also actually the primary driver why most people are looking for a new opportunity is because they maybe are being forced to consider going back when they're not certain they really want to. After 2 years really of most office towers remaining fairly empty, what our surveys would now tell us is that about 55% of senior managers want just what you alluded to. They want to have their teams come back into the office, to come back into the physical space, just like it used to be. Almost in some cases, we've seen hiring authorities waiting for the pandemic to end so things can go back to normal. And I don't think that's wise. I'm not sure things are ever quite going back to what they were pre-pandemic when it comes to the labor market. And so at the same time, when you have 55% of hiring managers wanting all their staff to come back into the office, we have about the same percentage of employees who are currently working from home telling us that if they're forced to go back in 100% of the time, they will look for a new job. And we are seeing that in a lot of the people who call us every day to look to have a new opportunity. They are really reflecting on the time they've spent remotely. And what has that meant for them? I think in the early part of the pandemic, it meant just health and safety, making sure that we all had that ability to remain isolated, to be bubbled, and to remain as healthy and safe as we possibly could for ourselves and for our loved ones. And that was priority number one. What we've seen now over time, though, is that maybe as the pandemic has at least been accepted and this way of life has become somewhat more normal, that people are acknowledging that there's maybe some benefit to this balance of having a little bit more flexibility to how you navigate your personal life and your professional life. Andrew, you've obviously got children. Likewise, I have children. Many people have either children or other priorities. It doesn't have to be just about children. It could be elderly parents. It could be pets. It could be special interest. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's important to you. And if you've started to create a better balance in your life of being able to integrate your professional life and your personal life over the last 2 years, then the idea that you're going to have to give that up and go back to the mindset of rushing to catch the train or sitting in long lines of traffic, which is certainly quite common here in the Toronto market, that's just not appealing. And if an organization is telling you that's what you're going to have to do now, you may actually entertain some other options. So for organizations that I would say are thinking that there's a way to do it differently, to employ people in more of a hybrid fashion, then I think that what you're actually going to see is a pretty healthy migration to the organizations who are offering that flexibility and offering that trust. Of the people I referenced earlier that are planning to look for work in the first 6 months, 35% of them are telling us the number one reason they're looking is for this very reason. The fact that they have a high priority being placed for themselves on the opportunity to work remote. And they do not want to go back to a mindset of having to actually go through that routine day in and day out. With, in some cases, the guilt associated with it, where you just couldn't leave the office. It was just sort of this understood, either explicitly or inferred, assumption that you needed to be in the office to be seen as a good employee. You needed to be in the office to be seen as productive. You need to be in the office to be seen as being engaged with the company. And that's just not the case anymore. And so I think that organizations need to be mindful of this as they are entertaining how to proceed from here. Those organizations that can offer more flexibility, more choice, more trust, and therefore allow employees to be happier because they're able to balance all their priorities will likely see more success. I think also what it has led to is a happier employee group. Happier employee groups tend to be more engaged, and more engaged employee groups have a lot of great things to offer, including problem solving, collaboration, and obviously the productivity that comes with trying to do their best for their organization. So those are the themes that we're seeing with regard to choice of hybrid in the workplace today.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I'm sitting here in downtown San Francisco, and I'm seeing the same thing that I see in Toronto every day. The financial district is just not back to work. It's very quiet compared to what it would be pre-pandemic. And certainly 2 years creates a little bit more than a trend. It is now kind of a way of life because of the fact that it's been that long. So given the fact that we really are seeing this shift to remote work, it's like I said, more reality than anything else. What are the challenges and opportunities that you're seeing kind of from a remote hiring perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I've talked to my leadership team about the fact that, it was arguably, while more scary, it was easier at the beginning of the pandemic because we all just went home and we hopefully had the ability to connect through technology and do our jobs. But we were all doing the same thing. We were all sitting at home, trying to stay safe. Thankful you still had the ability to connect to your colleagues and do your job. But it was almost easier to manage that because it was the only option for many people. Of course, there are types of roles and types of occupations that require you to be in, essential workers, et cetera. But for a lot of professionals in the space that we work in, the option to work remote was evident 2 years ago. And so at that time, managing your teams was more about making sure they were just okay from a health and safety perspective. Now we're having to face whatever lies ahead, which is the real customization of how do you engage almost each employee to achieve what is best for them. Does that mean that they're in the office 5 days a week? Because some people want that. Some people do genuinely want to go in every day. Does it mean that they're not in the office ever, except for essential meetings? Some people want that too. And then the majority of people seem to want something in between. And to some extent, I mean, some people I think feel like they should just wake up in the morning and decide that day. Do I feel like going in today, or do I actually think I'll work from home? There's a lot of choice right now that needs to be given. And I think as organizations can figure out a way to make it work, it's important that they maybe lose the traditional mindset that we all probably had. I personally had it as well. I remember actually being on a town hall panel internally at the company just a month before the pandemic hit. and being asked the question that we often got asked, which was, what's the company's position on being able to work from home? And we didn't really have an answer. We struggled with it. We couldn't envision how we could have a lot of people working from home on a daily basis. 30 days later, 16,000 employees across the company globally work from home, and we actually did quite well. And so we were forced into it, but we did acknowledge that we were able to still ultimately do our jobs. And so as organizations now envision the future, I think instead of getting stuck in the traditional mindsets that we may have had as leaders 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, you need to ask yourself, how might we be able to offer that much customization to our employees? How might we be able to allow them to work remote and have the choice and flexibility? How might we be able to trust them to do their professional jobs, regardless of where they are? I think the mindset that you need to be in the office to be productive is no longer the case. In fact, at our organization, I would tell you, we have seen a spike in productivity, which I think has been pretty common in many professional companies. Arguably, you could say it's because you're not commuting a couple hours a day, or you're feeling that you have more time, or whatever the rationale is for each individual. But overall, we do see more productivity. And that doesn't seem to be waning, even as the normalcy of COVID has now been accepted. The other thing that companies will benefit from, I believe, if they can get a strategy around hybrid, is they're going to have access to broader talent. We are seeing some organizations, and I know, Andrew, you and I have talked about this, that are very willing to hire talent, not only not in the local market, but not even in the local province or the local country. That they're willing to tap into skill sets that are far flung and potentially never meet this person face to face. We also see organizations that are still hedging on whatever the future is, and they're saying, well, we'd probably do a contract remote because we could possibly end that if needed. But if we're going to hire full time, we'd still like them, even though we'll offer it remote in the short term, we'd still like them to be in market, just in case things change and we need to bring them in. And so I think organizations that can get a strategy around this, they will ultimately have access to a broader base of talent. They'll have access to people in other markets, not just in your local market. I think also what that does is offer sometimes the benefit of tapping into different compensation that may occur in different markets as well, where the labor market may not be as difficult and the spot price of employment is a little lower. We are seeing companies set up operation in parts of Canada where they're bolstering things like, customer service centers or IT centers or shared services centers that are probably more profitable to do in certain markets than others. And they're very willing to now establish these operations, again, having lost the mindset that you need to have everybody in the same office tower in a downtown core. And so organizations, I think, will find that by doing so, you're able to avoid some of the issues that a rigid employee arrangement can have. We talked about the happiness that comes with having that flexibility. We hear it from our employees internally all the time, that this kind of choice and trust and flexibility has just brought them a significant amount of happiness in their professional life. And they appreciate the flexibility significantly, so they are highly engaged. And so, again, having a highly engaged workforce that is, yes, far flung, maybe not all sitting at the same floor in an office tower, they may prove to be much more valuable to you as an organization than you had in a traditional framework of everybody being in an office. I think trying to establish teams, obviously, in a hybrid world has its challenge. And we are working with a lot of organizations to ensure they do this successfully. But what we are hearing is that it's a little difficult to evaluate talent in a hybrid world. People still like to have the opportunity to physically meet in person if possible. It's not always available. And as I said earlier, if organizations sometimes drag their feet a little bit on this decision-making process, they will lose people. Good talent does not wait right now. And so if you do not have an efficient process in place, with all the stakeholders you need to make a decision quickly, you will lose people you want to hire. It's happening every day. I think also, if you do actually hire somebody, then the onboarding and the training that comes with you joining a new company is more challenging virtually. However, it can be done. You just need to think about how might we, and not that we can't, because it is happening in many organizations. I think also companies worry about how do you establish and maintain culture. And this is a very important part of a successful organization. You know, culture is intangible often, and trying to establish it and create it when you can't physically be together is difficult, without a doubt. But again, organizations are finding ways. In some cases, what we're seeing is that people are willing to actually gather together, but they don't really want to do it in the office. And so, can you create that on some sort of other event? Can you create that on the possibility of a charitable initiative where you gather to do something to support your community? You're spending time together, so you are forging your own bonds and relationships, but you're not doing it while sitting on a sales floor. And that's something that companies, I think, are now starting to embrace, because you have to find ways to create that employee engagement. That's the key. And the traditional ways of doing so, of again, bringing everybody into the office and bringing everybody into the boardroom and offering a tray of sandwiches while you do a town hall meeting, those are not going to be the best ways potentially going forward. You have to be creative. And I would encourage companies to listen to your employees about how they want this to happen. It's important that you survey your employees on a very regular basis. We have gotten into the cadence of doing so on a quarterly basis. And I think when you do it, you got to make sure the employees understand that you've heard what they've said and that you are willing to consider it and action it. If you don't have the ability to implement what they've asked for, then explain why you don't and give them the framework of your decision making. Communication during this time has become so critical. Overly communicating, early and often, being transparent, and really explaining to employees where you're at with your decision making about these very important decisions. Because in the absence of that kind of detail from you as a leader and as a company, they will form their own opinions and their own conclusions, and they will probably just vote with their feet and look elsewhere. So I would encourage you to be very proactive to avoid that exodus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the hybrid model, it presents a lot of challenges, right? I mean, one thing we've tried to do is make it easier for employees by picking the days and encouraging them to come in. So Monday, Wednesday, we just launched it in North America Thursdays. So we're calling it Collaboration Thursdays. But because when you go to the office and everybody's not there, or part of your team is not there, then you end up with challenges of, okay, how do we bring them in? And if some people are remote, some people are on Zoom or WebEx, and people are in the office, it just doesn't work as well as it did before. So I think that's, creating a whole set of complexity for companies to say, do I just stay hybrid? Do I go completely remote, or do I go back to the office? Which I think is pushing different companies in different directions. But from your perspective, when you talk to companies, what are you seeing about their decisions there? Are you seeing the kind of predictable trends that we're seeing, which is, I've seen companies with no plan and the office is empty, because I'll often say, can I come in on Monday to visit you, because everybody might be there. And other companies like starting to say, okay, let's do this day and this day, so we know everybody will be there, and it'll create a more normal experience.
Yeah, I think it goes back to listening to the employee group and forcing yourself and challenging yourself as a company, after hearing what they're telling you, to think, how might we be able to offer them what they want? Because here's the thing, if you get it wrong, you're going to have really, really significant impact on your company and your performance, because you're not going to be able to attract and retain talent. And so I think it's important that we are very, very aware of how we communicate around these topics. You just referenced the thought that we're going to have a collaborative Thursday, I think you said, right? And so we're encouraging our clients that we work with to be careful not to label in office as being better.
Right.
Right. So to think, well, if I need to be in the office to collaborate, then when I'm not in the office, I don't collaborate.
Yeah.
And that's not what we want. We have clients sometimes that say, well, it'd be great when we get everybody in the office and we can get productive. People have been very productive. I think they've been more productive. So I think that you want to be very careful as an organization to not label the office as better or worse. And the companies we're seeing who have decided to go all in on back in the office and who are heavily communicating that this is better for us as a company, this is better for us as an organization, this is ultimately better for you as an employee, they're struggling. And in our organization, we have operations in about 20 countries globally, heavy operations in the US, large operations here in Canada. I also run, as referenced, the Brazil and Chilean operations. And then my peers run our European and Asia Pacific business. It's very different by country. It's also almost a bit different by province in Canada. We're seeing different trends in different provinces. And so I think you got to be careful not to assume it's going to be one size fits all across the organization. Our history as an organization at Robert Half has been one of pretty heavy central decision making. And when the pandemic hit, fortunately, our executive team recognized that wasn't going to work around topics like hybrid and what to do about engaging a workforce in these very different country cultures. In some company cultures in our organization, in certain countries, it's more acceptable to be a little more expecting of people to come to the office. That's not what we're seeing in Canada. And it's slightly different again in Brazil, where it's a little more accepted that we may want you to come in a couple of days a week. And so it's different by jurisdiction. And I think that as we look at what's really appropriate for your employee group, you want to make sure that you have clearly listened and communicated what your vision is on this. I think where you have the option to offer the remote, I would do it. I would tell you that in Canada, and again, we were pre-pandemic, a pretty traditional culture when it came to being in the office. I was definitely of that mindset, although I probably didn't give it a lot of thought at the time. But I was definitely of the mindset that, yeah, you saw people getting in the office early, you thought that was good. You saw people staying a little later to get a job done, you equated that to dedication. That's just not really the norm anymore. Now I think what we've realized is that somebody who left at 3:00 because they had a personal commitment, but then logged back in later and completed the work for the day, arguably is doing a better job and is happier and contributing more than somebody who begrudgingly stuck around till 6:00 and maybe missed that sports opportunity with their kids or medical appointment with an elderly parent. And so I think that it's important that we are very mindful around that as we evolve as to what the new norm is. I would tell you that even though we were very traditional previous to the pandemic, I have given the direction to our Canadian employee group that you come to the office with purpose. You come to the office when you want to. We have no minimum days. We have no expectation of a certain amount of time in an office. What we've also communicated, though, is the framework of that decision. So here are the ways I've made the decision. I talked about the stakeholders in our business, which is similar for many companies. Stakeholders would be your peer group, your coworkers, because we collaborate so much. Stakeholders being our clients, because we have to service our clients. Stakeholders being the investors of the firm. We're an S&P 500 company. We're a public firm. We have to be mindful of performance. It's not a time where we're suggesting we're diluting our performance expectation. As many organizations, we're a very, very high performing, expecting organization, and that hasn't changed. And so what we're saying is you come to the office with purpose. when you feel it's going to be helpful in order for you to execute your professional responsibility. And we're also telling them that this is not something we're saying is going to be forever, because we don't know. So we'll give you a framework of decision making. We will communicate often and in a very transparent way about the change in that direction, if there is a change. What we anticipate is that people will start to gravitate to more and more time in person. And some of that is probably going to be driven by a fear of missing out. You look at the news in the morning, and if the highways are not busy, you conclude most people are actually home. And so I'm home, they're home, we're all home. It's okay. You start to see the news in the morning where there's more traffic and more people going in the office, and you see people downtown on the street corners waiting to cross the intersection. I think people will start to think like, well, maybe I should go in a day or two. And so it's my personal opinion, I don't know, but my personal opinion is that it will naturally gravitate to more time in the office than what we are seeing now. But we've made the decision to allow that to happen naturally versus forcing it. Because we have had some other markets in the company that have made the decision to be more prescriptive than that and say, no, we want you to come in 2 or 3 days a week, and you can even choose the days, it's fine. And that arguably is way more flexible than what we were before the pandemic, which was you were in every day. But what we found is that the employees responded by saying, we don't want to be told what to do right now. I've been able to make this work remotely for 2 years. I've been a great employee. I'm a top performer. Why not let me continue this? And that goes back to the discussion of, forcing yourself to think, well, how might we offer you that still? And if you can find that solution, then I think you are going to be better off as an organization than trying to force something that they may not want.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the idea of coming with purpose. Talking to my colleagues, when you come to the office and it's a normal day and you've got a whole bunch of Zoom meetings booked or WebEx with other people dispersed, you might as well be remote, because if you're just going to go lock yourself in an office and do those calls, and you may not even have that luxury if you don't. So it's really saying blocking your calendar to meet with the people that are in the office or planning ahead. And that's where I think that trend is going to be, come on Monday and we'll build the day around it so that you're not locked in a room talking to people in every other geography. And hopefully that will kind of work itself through where people are more aware of it. We've tried things like no office or no meeting Fridays and things like that. I know a lot of companies try those things. I think you need those trends to say, okay, come, everybody else will be here. Maybe we'll pick the days that aren't heavy traffic days if we can, and try to predict a little bit of that.
Yeah. Well, and what we're seeing too, I think, is that, we're an essential service. So we've technically been always available to go to the office because of our support of providing a catalyst in the labor market. So we've been an essential service since the beginning. But our office occupancy is relatively low. But what we are starting to see is, let's say you and I work together on a team, and you might decide to go in, and then I'll be like, oh, you're all right. Well, if you're going to go in, Andrew, let's grab lunch. So we're even just seeing situations where people are just going in for lunch. Got in at 11, chatted for a little bit, went for lunch, went home at 2. Now, back pre-pandemic, that wouldn't have gone over so well. But today, it's okay. You go home, they're probably going to log back in when they get home and complete the rest of their job for the day. And that's okay. But that's not easy for some leaders to get their head around. Because again, they're a little stuck in the tradition of, well, if you're not in the office, then you're probably out doing things that are not work related. And that's just, I think, indicative of that lack of trust. And so the trust factor is very, very important for this to work for both the employer and the employee.
Absolutely. And I know we've got a bunch of questions coming in, but one last question I had, I know talking to you, your business has grown considerably, and I don't know if you would have predicted that 2 years ago when we started locking down, but what is it about the pandemic that's caused your business to grow, and what's contributed to that?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, I think we all remember those fateful days, that weekend back in March 2020, when the world completely changed around us. And yeah, we were very concerned. We declined about 40% literally within a week. I mean, given the business that we're in, we only generate revenue when people are getting new jobs, and nobody was getting a new job. In fact, most people were just losing jobs. And a lot of our individuals that we would have on a contract relationship with clients were being put on furlough. So we were losing business very quickly. So that happened within that first couple of weeks of that second quarter in 2020. Since that time, we have had amazing growth every quarter since. So we are essentially a $300 million business in Canada, revenues. And we are up 40% so far this year. We do have that success, obviously, for both external and internal reasons. The external reasons we just talked a lot about. I mean, there's just a lot of transactions in the market right now. A lot of people moving jobs, a lot of fluidity in the market. And that's what helps us, obviously, to be successful as an organization. Companies are reaching out to us more than ever to gain our perspective and advice as to how can they ensure a very productive and engaged workforce. So we're seeing a lot of demand for our services. At the same time, internally, we have developed more service offerings, a more robust offering, so that's helped. But I would also say maybe the biggest thing that's impacted our success is that we've essentially put in place a lot of the things I've talked about. We have seen productivity rise dramatically per employee during this time. Yes, we did, like many companies, we had to furlough and ultimately to let go a material number of our workforce in Canada. And we have hired back also a material number of people again to the organization. But we're seeing contribution levels per employee well above what we would have ever seen pre-pandemic. We are also, as I said, we're surveying our employees on a quarterly basis. And I can tell you, I read every one of the responses. And we do put in practice as many of those as we possibly can. And when you do that with ideas that are generated from your employees, it's extremely meaningful. So we are seeing employees that are telling us that their engagement level, and the scores on our employee surveys would tell us that the engagement level is higher than it's ever been. We have adopted as an executive team a mindset around priority on people, culture, and then business, in that order. And when the pandemic first struck, we obviously had no choice but to be mindful of people and their well-being. It was very clear. People were scared, worried about their families, worried about their personal health, didn't even know what the world would be in the next day or two. And so the prioritization of people became a no-brainer. But we have committed to not lose sight of that, making sure that people are the priority, make sure that those people are taken care of, their well-being is top of mind. It's our number one criteria whenever we make a decision. Second thing is making sure the culture is one of high inclusion. Diversity and inclusivity is so important in today's society. Tolerance, making sure that you can bring your entire self to work, whatever that is, whatever challenges you have. I actually used to talk about, as a leader in the company, that when you came to the office in the morning, you kind of had to almost put to the side whatever is going on externally before you grab the handle and walk into the office. That was such a mistake for me to think that way, because that's just not practical. And now what I encourage people to do is bring your entire self to work. We train the leadership team to help people support whatever they need support on. We're not professional counselors, but we can traffic them to the support internally that we have. And only can, after you take care of people and their culture, can you expect business to optimize. And so this mindset of being very purposeful on people, culture, business, in that order of priority, has allowed us to see the performance that I referenced earlier. And yeah, we didn't anticipate it. I was very concerned. right now, as I said, we're about a $300 million business in Canada, and we have openly stepped to the mic and told people, including our clients and our staff, that we anticipate to be a $500 million business by the end of 2025, to add another 200 million in a couple of years. And we feel very comfortable that we can achieve that based upon the environment that we're operating in.
That's great. Swansea.
Wow. Well, thank you both for such an interesting, it was an excellent and informative discussion. I definitely have a lot of questions to go through in the Q&A with you. But at this moment, I would like to take some time to thank our sponsor, Johnson Insurance, for their ongoing support of GTA alumni events. As you can see from the slide, Johnson offers Memorial University alumni group rates on home and auto insurance. So now I will dive into the Q&A questions, but maybe I'll start with just a few comments that we also received. One comment was, it was great framing on how to look at a typical workday. I think flexibility is a theme here in addition to remote versus in office. And another statement was, stay interviews with current employees is a great idea. Thank you for that one. The first question is, do the wants, wishes, pay, etc. differ for those working home versus working in office? I've heard of companies offering less money and less benefits if you work from home.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it would be a dangerous assumption that you can pay people differently because they're working from home versus working in an office. However, I will tell you that, right, I mean, the labor market and the wage market and the spot price of hiring somebody in a particular role it's an open market. It's demand and supply, right? And so what we are seeing is, in some cases, professionals saying, I'd love the job, but I don't love the fact that it needs to be in the office either 5 days a week or even 3 days a week. So I'll consider it if you pay me more. I mean, that is a very, very common conversation right now. And so I think there is currently a little bit of maybe in the moment pressure to pay a little better if you want people to give up that choice and flexibility that we talk about, because that's essentially what it is. It's an exchange. I'm giving up flexibility and choice, and someone's going to have to pay me for it. Although I think in time that will maybe normalize, and I don't know that we'll see that kind of dispersion continue as things become maybe more normal in a hybrid environment.
Okay, great. Another question is, do you recommend key hours, days where everyone must be engaged at the same time?
So, you know, I'm certainly respectful that there are companies and organizations and jobs that require structure and that require critical times and things of that nature. And I'm not suggesting that that isn't real for certain organizations. What I am suggesting is that if you have the flexibility, then don't become prescriptive. Avoid currently any need to overly orchestrate your workforce. And what we have found at our company, and we see it as evidence with our clients, is that the more professional courtesy you give, the more trust and consideration you offer, you get it back so many times over by way of engagement and contribution. And so as soon as you start to put boundaries in place, you're taking away choice. And what we're seeing in the workforce is that if you start to remove choice, then you start to lose engagement. And if you have to ensure structure around a particular function of the company, then be sure to explain that so that people don't draw the wrong conclusions as to why you're asking them to give up some of that choice and flexibility. So straight up answer would be, if you do not need the structure, don't put it in place. Allow employees to form their own. And what happens is, when you have a highly engaged workforce, believe me, they will create innovation and process and structure that'll be way better than anything you can do for them. The more that they can do it themselves, because they're highly engaged and they want to do a great job for all the stakeholders we talked about, the more successful we're all going to be. But this kind of top-down pushing of prescribed processes is just not working right now.
Thanks for that, David. There's a question here. There's actually a couple of questions that talk about how to manage the different types of employees. For example, you talked about the employees that should be in the office versus the ones that can be at home. And how does the organization meet the needs of both employees without creating some levels of animosity potentially between the ones that are in the office and think that the ones that are home should be in the office as well?
Yeah, so that is an excellent question. And as I said at the beginning, it was easier to manage when we all sat at home. But as we start to see this evolution of hybrid, this particular question is one of the most important ones for us to be mindful of as leaders is, how do you treat those that are in the office versus those who are at home? How do you make sure you maintain some sort of objectivity around performance and contribution? Is it even humanly possible to be as objective about somebody you kind of see 2-3 times a week and you go and grab coffee with, or maybe grab lunch with, versus somebody who you've never met, who's only available on the screen? Will we start to see situations where there's a correlation of being in an office and getting career opportunities? That will potentially become problematic. We are very much encouraging our own leaders in the company to avoid using this in-office or flexible to work remote, avoid using it as some sort of reward. Avoid the urge when somebody maybe is struggling with their job to get their job done, avoid the urge as a default to say, well, maybe if you came to the office, you'd do better. Right? So we got to try to not, as leaders, even though we might not explicitly say it, we got to try to avoid inferring through our actions that being in is really better. If we're truly, genuinely saying that we support a hybrid work environment and that all employees would be equitable by way of being able to advance their careers, then we have to make decisions that align with that as well. And if you start with decision-making and actions that would contradict that kind of vision and guidance, it's going to create some animosity, as you said. And that's problematic. I think also you want to be mindful of even pressure amongst peers within the organization. There's going to be influence as to people suggesting they come in and go for lunch and do whatever. But I think you want to be careful that there's not too much pressure, which can create a toxic environment.
Okay, that's wonderful. There's a question here that I feel like you've answered, but I'm going to pose it to you. It's on the job evaluations and then the connection with working from home and job evaluations. What is the link between working from home and good systems of job evaluations? I see them as highly connected in order to maintain a system of fairness. So is there a connection between job evaluations and working from home?
Yeah, I certainly would acknowledge that there are things you can assess and maybe conclude from how somebody is doing that are possibly only really achievable if you have some time together. I'm sitting here today in Montreal. I'm here to do some meetings with my leadership team. Some of them I haven't seen in 2 years. And after spending a couple of days with them, having gone for dinner last night, absolutely, I have a better sense of how some of them are doing than I may have in the last couple of years when we just did so virtually. But I think you can't just then conclude that that needs to be the case for everybody. And you have to be able to, still have the ability to appropriately recognize and acknowledge those who, like over the last 2 days here, we had some people decide not to come in, and they joined the meeting virtually. And I have to be very mindful to ensure that I don't discount their contribution or somehow conclude that they're not as serious about their job or that they're not performing as well. And so I think it is important that we have a very clear understanding about what is it that somebody's job really is. What are the KPIs of that job? Are they doing well with that job and contribution? And again, challenge ourselves to think, how might we be able to have them fully contribute to the company without having to physically be in the office all the time? It's not easy. And we certainly don't have all the answers on this yet either. But what I would tell you is that listen to your employees. Ask them, how could I be able to evaluate your contribution if you are spending less time remote? Let's talk about that. They often have some of the best answers. We don't have to come up with all of them in the top down. And so I think just high participation and listening with your employee group will solve some of the questions we're facing.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question on a different topic. Do you have any suggestions for prospective employees who have been made an offer on how best to counter in a way that won't offend the offering organization?
So if I understand the question, so you've gotten an offer from another company and you are trying to get a counter from your current company without offending them?
Without offending them.
I guess, my comments earlier about organizations being very proactive on stay interviews and things like that with your employees and making sure you're listening to your employees, I would encourage the same for employees. If you need to talk to your employer about something that you're not happy with, whether it be your current position, your contribution, your lack of clarity of your future with the company, your compensation, your work structure, whatever it is, I would encourage you to go and have all those conversations before you go and get an offer somewhere else. When you get into this situation, if there's already now an offer from another firm, it does create some uneasiness, certainly with an organization. And what we generally advise is that if you have done all of the due diligence to address the issues that you're seeing in your company, and it hasn't been addressed to your satisfaction, to the extent that you've now gone across the street and gotten an offer from another firm, then even if you get counter offered, chances are the things that bothered you are still not going to be fixed. And that person I talked about earlier that got a 40% increase in base probably will be looking for a job again within the next 6 months, because they're going to get used to the paycheck and they're still going to be unhappy. And money doesn't solve the issue. And so I think that, if this person who's asking the question is actually finding themselves in that situation where maybe they didn't proactively address things and they have now an offer elsewhere, if they do want to stay with their company, maybe go to them and say, look, I own this. I should have come to you. I should have come to you and we should have had a conversation. I didn't. I own that. But now I'm in a situation where I've been approached by another firm, and so can we talk? And I think only by way of having that open conversation can you kind of get to the bottom of the real issues, and just be really careful about maneuvering that kind of counteroffer. I certainly do not encourage ever to go out and get an offer to try to provide leverage with your current company. It rarely ever works out in your favor.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Another question is, David, you mentioned connecting in a meaningful way with employees in order to retain them. How can nonprofits or public institutions do this when they can't offer great compensation or trips abroad, like you said?
Yeah, I certainly, obviously, different organizations that have different business models have limitations in some cases about what they can offer by way of compensation. Clearly, compensation is typically one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cost item for any company. And so we have to be equitable. I know there's not an endless amount of money to be offered by way of compensation. But when you think about those organizations that may be working in a not-for-profit, quite often their purpose as an organization is extremely personal and impactful for people. And again, the more that you can allow people to align with that purpose and feel like they're actually contributing to a greater good, that often takes away some of the monetary issues. You know, there's a philosophy out there, which I do subscribe to, that money is an issue until it's not an issue. So until when you get to that number, whatever that number is for you, that you think you should be paid or that you need to be paid if there's an issue around, you know, managing your lifestyle, once that's no longer an issue, other things clearly become priority, like alignment with the company, culture, engagement, feel like you're contributing to a greater good. And so I think that's where it becomes important to, is if possible, get in that mindset of each of your employees as to why is it you're here? Why did you get up this morning and come to work, either virtually or in person? What's the motivation for you? Because it's different for employees, obviously. For some, it is money. For some of it's they like whatever, the benefits or the environment. For some, they like the culture. For some, they like their manager. For some, they like the greater good of the organization. I think that what we are seeing is that there is, over the last couple of years, generally a reflection by people about what's important to them, what is important in their life. And the more you can align the company vision and culture to an individual's core values, the higher the engagement. And I think for people who are not aligned with the organizational values and culture and vision, no matter what you're paying them, there will be an uneasiness about that lack of alignment that just will cause problems over time. And so I get the fact that there may be budgetary restrictions for certain companies more than others. And then you have to work on the intangibles that are very meaningful and in often cases more meaningful once compensation is taken care of.
Okay, great. Now there's a question here about how organizations balance the need for flexibility in working from home versus working in the office with how they plan for office space and accommodation for employees.
Yeah, so I mean, real estate has become a very important discussion for many organizations. It is for us as well. You know, we were actually literally just about to sign for significantly more office space downtown Toronto just before the pandemic. We dodged the bullet. And so now we have applied a different rationale where we are not assuming 100% of our staff would be in the office at any given time going forward. So we have applied really about a 2-to-1 ratio that we assume that will be adequate space to accommodate. So if you have an office of 100 people, technically, in theory, you only need 50 spots. When you take into account that at any given time, people are going to be on vacation, some people are not going to be maybe feeling well, some people are going to be on a leave of absence, and then you have the hybrid impact. And so you don't need, in our opinion, to have all the space we may have had before. But I'm also very open with our staff, and this is applicable to our downtown Toronto office, where while we are going to go with the rationalized space mentality going forward, and while I am extremely, genuinely supportive of a hybrid work structure, and I embrace your decision to work from home, we also redesigned our office space to make it as enticing as we possibly can. So much more collaboration space, much less traditional space, much more space to host clients for events, entertainment area, TVs, things that create almost a more welcoming environment. Again, because we think we want them to go in with purpose And that purpose isn't to be productive. They can be productive at home. The purpose of going in is to forge culture, to forge collaboration, to forge community, relationships with colleagues. And so we've created and designed space to foster that, not to foster productivity.
That is great. I will just read one more question, and you've answered this in your final statement, but the last question was, are you willing to share some of the new or novel employee engagement strategies you are implementing as a result of your quarterly employee surveys? And it sounds like some of that space that you're talking about is a way that you are engaging employees.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm happy to share some of them. I would say that what we've tried to do, again, is to reflect what we've heard from our employees. And so our offerings, I would say, are fairly diverse. Some are what appear to be more expensive than others. Some are not. One thing we have done, as I stated, was we've made the office space, more welcoming for purpose. So that one we've explained. We also materially invested in our employees' professional development during the time of the pandemic and introduced a $25,000 tax-free expense for each employee, no matter what your function is in the company, to improve your professional development in an area that you so choose. That was very significant. And, some people who countered that might have said, well, hang on, aren't you just training people to leave for a better job? No, we're training people to engage better with us, which is what has actually happened. We also have put a significant amount of time into forming employee groups that are not prescribed by leadership, but born out of ideas of the employees themselves, to align with what is going on in society, things that are important. There were no shortage of societal issues that occurred during the pandemic. They actually probably became even more pronounced. And so we have fostered an environment where employees can gather and bring to light the issues that are important to society. That hasn't cost us anything, but the meaningfulness of it is significant. We also have offered support for home office. So those programs are costs. But in the greater scheme of things, when you're having less office and no expensive mileage and not as much travel, you probably have less SG&A to worry about right now anyway, from a cost perspective. And so we have offered financial support for home office reimbursement. So again, trying to keep it very diverse. It's not even so much to make sure that you get it right as much as you get it right for your employees. So listen to them. These are just things we've done because we heard from our employees these were important to them. So these are the programs we've created and innovated. I would encourage you to listen to your own employees and see what's important for them.
That is excellent. We have come right to the end of our time. Andrew, David, I want to thank you both for an excellent and informative discussion. I know that the audience members truly appreciated it. I want to also thank the audience members for your time today. We really appreciate you joining us and giving us a little bit of your day to listen to this presentation. If you enjoyed today's event, please check out Memorial University's website at www.mun.ca/alumni for upcoming events. And don't forget to join the Memorial University of Newfoundland Alumni Greater Toronto Area Group on LinkedIn. As I mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded and you'll receive a link for it in an upcoming email. So please keep your eyes on your inbox. Thank you once again and enjoy the rest of your day.